러시아의 우크라이나 무력 침공이 시작된 이후 국제사회는 러시아의 푸틴을 향해서 맹비난하고 있습니다. 미국을 비롯한 서방 국가들은 러시아를 향해서 강력한 금융 제재에 들어갔고요. 또 독일과 프랑스 등은 우크라이나에 무기를 지원해주고 있습니다. 우크라이나 군인들도 물론 러시아군이 몰고 온 탱크들을 죽음을 두려워하지 않고 훌륭하게 아주 잘 막아내고 있지만 그와 동시에 또 많은 피해를 입고 있습니다. 여러분들도 이미 뉴스 화면을 통해서 보셨듯이 수많은 민간인이 가방 몇 개를 든 채 피난길에 올라야 했고요. 또 전쟁터에 나가면서 딸을 끌어안고 통곡을 하는 아빠의 모습, 지하철역에서 공포에 떨고 있는 어린 아이들의 모습, 얼마나 끔찍하고 안타까운 모습들입니까? 그런데 우리가 조금 더 깊게 들여다봐야 할 것은 제가 이미 여러 번 여러분들에게 설명해 드렸지만 우크라이나에는 약 20여만 명 이상의 유대인들이 아직도 있다고 하는데요. 그들도 역시 그곳을 떠나고 싶어 하고 있다는 것이죠. 바로 이스라엘로 돌아오고 싶어 한다는 얘기입니다. 알리야하겠다는 것이죠. 현재 이스라엘로 돌아오고 싶어하는 우크라이나의 유대인들은 얼마나 되는지, 그들이 이스라엘로 돌아온다면 어떤 과정을 거쳐서 돌아오게 되는지, 그리고 그들의 지금 상황은 어떤지 궁금하지 않을 수가 없는데요. 지금 전 세계의 유대인들을 이스라엘로 안전하게 데려오는 알리야를 담당하고 있는 이스라엘의 주이시 에이전시라는 단체가 있습니다. 그래서 오늘은 주이시 에이전시의 우크라이나 알리야 담당자를 연결해서 긴급 특별 인터뷰를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 주이시 에이전시의 크리스천 프렌즈 부서의 저스틴 볼랜드 씨로부터 현재 우크라이나의 상황을 좀 자세하게 들어보도록 하죠. 안녕하십니까?
Hello, good to see you, Brad Kim.
현재 지금 우크라이나 상황을 우리는 그 미국이나 유럽, 이 서방의 언론을 통해서만 그 우크라이나의 상황을 듣고 있는데 혹시 그거 말고 이스라엘 쪽에서 바라보는 우크라이나의 현재 상황은 어떻게 보고 계십니까?
So Israel has its eyes on Ukraine. As you know, there are 200,000 Jews living in Ukraine, and there are around 15,000 Israeli citizens in Ukraine. So we have a vested interest in the stability of Ukraine and the Jewish communities in that place. Israel is very concerned for their safety and for their security, and is hoping for a diplomatic and peaceful end to this dramatic invasion of Russian forces. We are hoping for and praying for a free and democratic Ukraine. And this is what Israel is feeling. This is what Israel is working towards. As you know, Ukraine has asked for Israel to be a mediator between Ukraine and Russia as this is going on. So this is in the discussion as Israel being a neutral third party, being able to speak into and hopefully bring diplomatic and peaceful ends to this. So Israel is in the center of this conflict in a major way.
주이시 에이전시가 그 우크라이나에도 있다라고 얘기를 들었는데 혹시 우크라이나의 유대인들이 나도 이스라엘로 이제 돌아가고 싶습니다. 이런 그 문의 전화가 많이 온다면서요?
Yes. So just to give you a little perspective, on Wednesday before the war began, we got 2 calls for Jews wanting to make Aliyah to Ukraine. On Thursday, we received 400 calls of Jews wanting to make Aliyah from Ukraine. And over the past several days, as we've opened up a toll-free hotline and local numbers that Ukrainians can call, we've received 5,000 phone calls from Jewish people who are in distress. And of the 5,000, half of those people want to make Aliyah to Israel now.
그렇게 전화가 오면은 주이시 에이전시는 그들에게 어떤 도움을 줄 수가 있습니까? 그들이 이스라엘로 이렇게 돌아올 수 있도록 실제적인 역할을 해 주시는 거죠?
Yes, well, first, they need to be able to leave the place where they're living. Maybe they're in a place where the Russian troops are coming in, they're seeing tanks, they're hearing bombs. First, we have to get them from the place where the fighting is happening to a safer place inside Ukraine. So we've opened up a shelter for refugees inside Lviv, which is in the far west. This is where it's not as much fighting going on there. It's more calm. So this is where the Israeli embassy is relocated, as well as the main office of the Jewish agency. And this is where we've opened a shelter. So far, 100 Jewish people are in that shelter, and we expect hundreds more to come in the coming days. So the first is getting them to a safe place. Next, we need to transport them from Ukraine to a neighboring country like Hungary, Moldova, Romania, Poland. So 2 days ago, we were able to take 16 Jews on a bus from Ukraine and transport them to Warsaw, Poland. Now they're able to stay in a safe place in a hotel while we figure out how we're going to get them to Israel. So the real issue is now providing safe access and safety for these Jews that are in Ukraine to get to a safe place. It's going to take time for us to be able to start Aliyah flights because the entire airspace is closed in neighboring countries around Ukraine. So it's a difficult time right now. So right now we need to just give them food, water, shelter. This is what's most needed right now.
그런데 그들이 이스라엘로 오고 싶다고 해도 우크라이나 정부에서 밖으로 나가서 이스라엘로 가게 하고 있습니까?
Yes, so there are around 15,000 Israeli citizens who live in Ukraine. So these are citizens who have Israeli passports that can come to Israel tomorrow if there was a flight. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is helping with those people as well as the Jewish Agency. And then the Jewish people who want to make Aliyah, what the Ministry of Interior is doing is they're going ahead and making the process for Aliyah much more simple and expedited. So they won't have to submit as many documents to prove their Jewish ancestry. Now, what Ukraine is doing currently is if you're a man and you're age 16 to 60 years old, you are not allowed to leave Ukraine.
У 27 лідерів Європи, чи буде Україна в НАТО, але які при цьому у нас будуть гарантії. І найголовніше, які конкретні країни нам їх дадуть.
그런데 우크라이나에서 이스라엘로 오고 싶어하는 그 유대인들 중에 이 사람이 정말 유대인인지 유대인이 아닌지 이거 확인할 수 있는 방법이 있습니까?
Yes, so people who are eligible to make Aliyah, we believe that in Ukraine there's around 200,000 people who are eligible to make Aliyah under the law of return. So the law of return says that if you have a Jewish mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather, then you can make Aliyah to Israel. So this is done by showing birth certificates and documents that show that your family connection and ancestry. So that's the process that Jewish people have to go through in order to show that they are Jewish and they are eligible to make Aliyah. So this process is being expedited because it requires lots of different documents, and those are very difficult to get in the middle of a war.
작년도인 2021년도에도 우크라이나에서 유대인들이 이스라엘로 알리야를 한 몇천 명 정도 했다라고 얘기를 들었는데 금년에 이번에 러시아하고 우크라이나하고 이 군사적 충돌 일어난 이후 금년 말까지 금년에만 몇 명 정도 우크라이나의 유대인들이 이스라엘로 알리야할 것으로 이렇게 예상을 하고 계십니까?
Around 3,000 Jews made Aliyah in 2021 from Ukraine. Now, I will say that in 2014, 15, 16, during the war with Crimea, when Crimea was annexed from Ukraine, we saw the number to get between 6,000 and 8,000 each of those years. So the number went up drastically during the war, and that was in a small isolated area in eastern Ukraine. So now we are anticipating an additional 3,000 Jews who want to make Aliyah from Ukraine. But that's just our initial working model. That number could go much higher. So we're preparing for 3,000. We're trying to fundraise to help 3,000 Jews make Aliyah as soon as possible. So this year we are preparing for an additional 3,000 Ethiopians to make Aliyah. So included in that number now is an additional probably 3,000 to 6,000 Ukrainian Jews that we will have to find a place, find hostels, find hotels, rent new facilities, provide temporary housing for these refugees, the Jewish refugees who will come to Israel in the coming months.
이번에 우크라이나에서 이렇게 러시아하고 군사적 충돌이 일어날 거를 혹시 이스라엘 정부 쪽에서는 미리 그것을 알고 또 주이시 에이전시에서도 그걸 알고 이렇게 미리 준비해 놓은 것도 있습니까?
Yes, we had contingency plans in place for a war on Ukraine, and this is why we were able to start moving so quickly when the war began. Now, I will say that this is the worst case scenario. We expected maybe there would be a war on the east side of Ukraine, isolated to a certain area. But now the worst case scenario has come true, and these Russian forces have invaded by land, air, and sea from all the borders. So this is the worst case scenario we're working with in the current framework.
그러면 지금 현재 상황에서 우크라이나에서 이스라엘로 이번에 전쟁이 난 이후에 이스라엘로 급하게 온 그 유대인들도 있습니까?
No one from Ukraine has made Aliyah to Israel yet since the wars began. And this is because there are no flights out of Ukraine. Airports are closed, and the air spaces all around Ukraine are also closed. So this makes air travel almost impossible at this time. So we're trying to figure out how we move these Ukrainian Jews from Ukraine to a country where there's a flight that they can take to another country that then they can take again to Israel. So that will involve all of the governments of Israel. It may involve some kind of military transport. We're hoping that we can just get regular charter flights, regular flights, and chartered flights. So it will be a combination of all kinds of different ways to rescue these Jews and bring them to Israel.
지금 그럼 이스라엘 정부도 그 우크라이나에 있는 유대인들을 향해서 뭐 이렇게 비상약품이나 비상식량 그 이런 것들을 이렇게 보내고 있습니까? 아니면 보낼 예정입니까?
One important thing to note is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem is preparing for an operation to transfer humanitarian aid to Ukraine, sent to Warsaw, Poland, and from there the equipment will pass on trucks into Ukraine, crossing the border of Poland. This is going to be coats and blankets and sleeping bags and tents and water purification systems, as well as water. And so this is the first huge amount of humanitarian aid that we have heard about going into Ukraine, and Israel is the one sending it. So I think it's a beautiful picture about how God has blessed Israel and how Israel is able to just bring aid into Ukraine. So we need to pray that these trucks, the planes can make it into Warsaw, Poland, and then these trucks pass through the border into Ukraine, and this aid can get to the places where it's needed most.
지금 우크라이나의 유대인들의 그런 상황들을 주이시 에이전시에서 우리 브래드TV뿐만 아니라 전 세계 많은 기독교인들한테 상황을 알리고 기도 요청을 했을 거라고 생각이 되는데 어떻습니까? 그 미국이나 다른 유럽이나 또 뭐 일본이나 아시아 국가 이런 데서 어떤 도움의 손길들이 좀 오고 있습니까?
First off, the entire Jewish world is mobilized to help the Jewish people of Ukraine. Number one. And there's a huge presence of Christians also in Ukraine. So there's churches, there's Christian organizations, and I see them all mobilizing to send aid, to send help all throughout Ukraine. So I believe that help is arriving, help is coming, and we just need to pray that it will get to people before they're in a really bad situation.
지금 이 시간 우크라이나에 있는 그 유대인들을 이스라엘로 알리야 시키는 일을 그 주이시 에이전시가 담당해서 그 일들을 감당해 나가고 있는데 지금 이 순간 주이시 에이전시에게 가장 필요한 부분, 우리 브래드TV 시청자 여러분들께서 도와드릴 수 있는 부분이 있다면 어떤 걸 도움을 요청하시겠습니까?
Yes, currently we're operating the shelter inside Lviv, Ukraine. This is providing food and water and housing for these refugees. You know, many of them, they got in their cars and they just started driving with whatever they could grab quickly. So They don't have need everything. They need clothing, food, water, hygiene. So this will be the situation also in all of our centers in Moldova, Hungary, Poland, and Romania that we're opening that will help people as they get out of Ukraine and make their way to these Aliyah, we're calling them Aliyah processing centers. So these will be places where they can be housed, where they can stay, we can give them food and water. So the need is for funding to supply all the needs of these Jewish people and care for them until the day they can make Aliyah to Israel. So we are estimating that this is $805 per person to get them to a safe place and to house them, as well as then to pay for the air flight here to Israel when that occurs. So the cost is around $800 per person, and so it's a practical way you can help. But importantly, we as Christians need to come together and pray for Ukraine. You know, there's 40 million people in Ukraine. Many of them are Christians, and some of them are Jews, around 200,000 Jews. But this is a huge humanitarian crisis for anyone who lives in Ukraine. So our hearts need to come together and pray for the people of Ukraine.
지금 우크라이나에서 러시아하고 일어나고 있는 이 군사적 충돌 그리고 그에 따른 우크라이나의 유대인들의 이스라엘로 알리야 이런 것들을 우리가 성경적으로 어떻게 봐야 되고 또 이런 일들을 위해서 우리가 어떻게 기도하는 게 좋겠습니까?
You know, throughout the Bible, the prophets all speak of God bringing his people back to Israel. Hundreds of times we see God bringing his people back, that he will bring them back. I love Isaiah 43. Isaiah 43 starts out and it says, "This is the Lord, he formed you. Jacob, he formed you, Israel. Do not fear." And then it goes on to say, "I am with you, and I will bring your children from the east. I will gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up." That's Russia, the north. That's Ukraine, that's the north. "And to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the end of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, for whom I created for my glory and whom I made." And I really believe Isaiah 43 is a place that Christians can read and a place that we can pray from because these are, the prophet is recounting the promises of God for Israel, for the Jewish people, and it really gives us some footing and some foothold to pray into this situation in Ukraine, and we can call this verse out by name and pray to God. You know, when I was driving here this morning, I was reminded of Jehoshaphat. When he went to war in 2 Chronicles 20, there were all these enemies that were coming against the children of Israel, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Meunites. And what Jehoshaphat did was he called all the people to a fast. And after that, while the fasting was going on, he began to remind God of all the promises that he'd done for Israel, all that he said he would do, all that he did, and all he said he would do. And then those people all came together and worshiped God before the battle. And then that morning, the army set out to fight the Ammonites and the Moabites. And Jehoshaphat sent the worshipers ahead. And those worshipers, the men, worshipped ahead of the army. And the men sang the song, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever." And as they began to sing and as they began to praise, the Lord set ambushes around the men of Moab, and the men of Seir, and the men of Ammon, and they began to attack each other. So when the children of Israel showed up, everyone was already dead because the Lord had fought the battle for them. And so I think that 2 Chronicles 20 and Isaiah 43 are places we can pray from. And just this morning I was reading that the Russian tanks, of course, they've come into Ukraine from all different directions. And so now, after 4 days of fighting, these tanks are running out of fuel, and the civilians who have arms are able to overtake these soldiers, are able to capture them. They're able to burn tanks, and so we can see that God is going before, and He's destroying, causing confusion among the enemy, and even some of the soldiers are asking these Ukrainians for directions. It's almost comical what's going on, and so I think we need to just continue to pray that the God of the angel armies would go before the people of Ukraine. They would provide protection for them, and that this war would come to an end swiftly, that God would do that for us. We, as the Jewish agency, and really as the state of Israel, are really preparing for this to be a long effort and a long crisis. This humanitarian effort and the refugees that are fleeing to neighboring countries could go on for a long time. And so we're preparing for that, but we're also hoping for the best. We're hoping for a swift end to this conflict, and that God would cause the thing just to end quickly, and the Russian forces will be expelled from Ukraine. So this is how we can pray as Christians, and we can band together and see God hear our prayers and answer our calls.
여러분 지금까지 들으셨다시피 현재 우크라이나에서는 러시아의 침공으로 인해서 피난민들의 대탈출이 이어지고 있다고 하죠. 그리고 우크라이나의 유대인들 역시 그곳을 떠나서 이스라엘로 알리야하기 원한다고 합니다. 하지만 너무나 갑작스럽게 일어나는 일들이라서 여러 가지 대처하는데 어려운 점들이 많다고 합니다. 평소에 전 세계에 흩어진 유대인들이 이스라엘로 알리야할 수 있게 해달라고 기도하던 우리 브래드TV 시청자 여러분들 아닙니까? 우리가 도와야 될 것 같습니다. 전 세계 많은 분들도 기독교인들도 또 이렇게 그 우크라이나의 유대인들을 위해서 기도도 하고 도움의 손길들을 보내고는 있지만 역시 그럼에도 불구하고 부족한 건 어쩔 수가 없죠. 등 붙이고 잘 곳도 마땅치 않다고 합니다. 이스라엘로 간들 그들의 마음이 편하겠습니까? 그들이 호텔 식당을 원하는 것도 아니고 호텔 방을 원하는 것도 아니다. 우리가 조금씩 도와야 하지 않겠습니까? 이 마지막 때에 결국은 그들이 이스라엘로 돌아가기 위해서 하나님께서 하시는 이 놀라운 역사와 기적의 현장에 여러분이 함께 동참해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 아직도 남아있는 유대인들이 모두 다 이스라엘로 안전하게 돌아갈 수 있도록 우리 브래드TV의 가족들이 함께 도와주셨으면 좋겠습니다. GC의 에이전시 크리스천 프렌즈 부서의 저스틴 볼랜드 씨도 끝까지 맡은 바 소임을 잘 감당해 주시리라 믿습니다. 오늘 이렇게 시간 내주시고 우크라이나의 긴박한 상황을 자세하게 설명해 주셔서 감사합니다.
Thank you, Brad. So honored to be with you today.